Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon session on how new approaches can deliver competitive advantages. I'm Ellen Bennett, I'm the editor of Utility Week, and I'll be chairing today's debate. I'm joined here by a panel who I'm going to ask to briefly introduce themselves and give you a flavour of what we're going to be talking about this lunchtime. So, starting with you, Steve, please.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve.
Can't hear.
Fozzard. Is it on? Are we on now? There we go. I knew I'd get with the technology sooner or later. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Steve Fozzard. I work in the supply chain in Costain, and we look at factory thinking. And we're going to take some time during this session to explain what that means for our clients and our suppliers.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Colin Raynell. I'm an operations director at Costain in the water sector. As Steve said, we're going to focus this conversation on what we call, or loosely termed, factory thinking. It's a different way of thinking about how we deliver going forward, much more about productisation. Reason I'm passionate about it, I come from a different industry, I've worked in different sectors, and I think product thinking could be introduced much more into this sector.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
No.
Hello? Yeah, that's better? Okay, good. Yeah, hi, my name's Matt Crabtree. I'm the Water Director for Costain, responsible for all the water business within the group. I think for me, the off-site manufacture piece that we're about to talk about is actually much more than that. And the guys are going to explain as we get going, and we hope we get some good questions around how there is more to this than just off-site. It's about a whole factory thinking process and a product mentality that we need to get into in this industry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, thank you. My name is Richard Ogden. Thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. I'm looking forward to this. Talk a little bit about Build Off-Site and how that can be integrated into the water sector. I'm passionate about off-site. I started the organisation Build Off-Site about 10 years ago with a little bit of help from government. And I draw you to 4 tenets which I'd like to draw on during the day, or during the afternoon. If you look at Peter Hansford's construction strategy, 2025 construction strategy, he talks about 33% less in cost, 50% faster delivery, 50% more sustainable, and 50% more exports. Now, if you think about those things, there's no client in the land that I know, be it public or private, who wouldn't want all those things. So they're great things to work for and towards. So I would say today we're going to open up that box and talk about the things that can help enable that. So I'm looking forward to this afternoon.
Thank you very much. And just to say, while we're having the panel discussion, I'll be asking some questions, but we want this to be a very interactive session. So if you'd like to interrupt with a question, please wave your hand, and we'll have some dedicated time for questions from the floor at the end as well. So I'm going to start by asking the basic question, really, which is the journalist prerogative, which is what is off-site and what does it mean for the water industry? Richard.
A lot of people think that off-site is about toilet pods on the back of a lorry. So most people can see that. But if I was to go to the other end of the spectrum and start talking about the cheese grater that's being built at Leadenhall Street, that is a fully componentized, manufactured building that is being manufactured off Junction 31 on the M1 and delivered in 70 and 80 ton loads every evening when it's dark. Now, some people can't get their heads around that. They think it's too difficult. They can't be. It's not possible. You have to construct something on site. So off-site is a series of components that fit together with right first-time quality, manufactured components, not craft made on site. That's the fundamental difference. Now, that can go to a total building, which we call 3D construction. And so I'm sure you've seen some of those wandering down the motorway late at night. So it's a series of components, or a hybrid, you can put the two together. So it's componentized, manufactured, or as Colin was saying, factory thinking. And it does include everything, including foundations as well. Some people think that it must start from the foundation. That isn't true. It's everything from the base of the foundation right up to where the roof touches the sky and everything in between. So it is skidded M&E plant rooms that are all pre-commissioned. It makes ultimate sense because it's right first time quality. You wouldn't build a car in a field, so why build a building in one?
Cool.
Colin, I know you've had some experience of different industries. Perhaps you could talk a bit about what off-site means for them and what lessons you think can be applied to water.
Okay, yeah, sure. I guess, first of all, I mentioned in the auto industry, so I'll give an analogy of, years ago I worked for Ford Motor Company and we owned Aston Martin. And when they first bought Aston Martin, they had the old Aston Martin and it was built in a shed, kind of Morgan-esque like. So the only thing that Ford could do for the first 3 years was what I call tidy the shed. That's kind of that's not productisation factory thinking, that's all they could do at that point. At the same point, they were working out the next generation of their product, the DB7, which had all shared componentry with many Ford and Jaguar products. And they also reinvented how they delivered it, so they then put it into a modern factory. That's kind of the analogy I would put to what we're trying to do at the moment. A lot of what we're doing in the water sector is what I'd call tidying the shed. So i.e., we've got the same old product, but we've moved the location. We just put a roof over it. We've still got complex construction on-site or off-site. The real advantage here is how we productise our thinking, and then we decide how simple we can make the assembly, and then we can work out where you put that assembly, in a factory or simply on-site.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that the Costain strategy isn't to develop our own factory, but it's to work with a supply chain. So we're adopting a supply chain-led strategy. So we'll be selecting partners that we will be working with very closely in the future. That gives us the opportunity of having a virtual factory. So if we can pick the best elements of design, pick the best elements of mechanical and electrical, and then pick the best elements of the civils specialisms, we can plug those together and become an integrator of those solutions. And we find there's significant client appetite. It gives them cost and program certainty, gives them increased productivity, improves their safety performance because it reduces the amount of time spent working at height and working at depth, improved sustainability performance because all the waste can be recycled. And we work in an industry where there's a terminology that it's accepted that we have a term called defects. Your client and your customer should not be your quality control department. What we find with off-site manufacture is that it gives us the ability to plug and play, test a solution, and deliver it and repeat it many, many times. Now, once you can do that, there are no surprises for your client. When you come to turn that asset on, it works as intended. And we find that we're trying to create a new language around the assets that exist within our client's base. A lot of our clients have asset standards departments, and they're much maligned, but wrongly so. They do protect the client's brand and reputation, but we feel if we just juxtapose those letters, turn them around and develop a range of standard assets, that's more positive. It means that the client then has got a product that they can identify as suitable for a certain application, and then get really, really smart at delivering it much quicker. And that for me is, they're just some of the benefits of factory thinking. So I hope that goes somewhere towards answering your question there.
Kind of building on from that, the benefits to the customer clearly in terms of reduced inventory and more standardisation of product and maintenance and operation, which are key factors of any asset management business. When we had an AMP6 launch with Severn Trent a couple of months ago, the question was asked how many different sorts of light fittings do you think we have in Severn Trent? I think the answer was something like 472. You wonder, well, across the whole range of network, if you could start to standardise, start to reduce the inventory, surely to goodness the operation of the asset must become more efficient.
I suppose the obvious question that springs to mind is, this sounds great, so why isn't everyone doing it? Why isn't it happening more?
Richard, do you want to kind of give your view of the industry first?
Yeah, unfortunately I've been in the industry for 50 years. That's a long time, so I've seen a lot of change. And people often ask this question, and the only reasonable answer I can give is that construction is steeped in history. I think there's only one thing more difficult than construction, and that's the NHS. Well, we won't go into the NHS because that's too difficult to fix. Many people have tried, and I think it's in the same sort of genre. So why? Ask yourself the question why. I was lucky enough to travel up to a site in the Orkneys called Skara Brae. It's 5,000 years old, and you'd recognise it as a home today. And I think that's how slowly we have moved in construction. We move very ponderously, very slowly. It's very considered, supposedly. And then we make comparisons like Colin has just done with the car industry. And the car industry is only 100 years old. 100 years old is nothing. That's 2 generations. And then we make comparisons with the aircraft industry or marine. Marine is slightly older, but in its format today, it is very manufactured. That's why we have no manufacturing in the UK. It's all gone to Korea. They manufactured it. We craft built it. So aeroplanes, aeronautics, the things we make comparisons on or with, bear no comparison. So we're mentally stuck with the wheelbarrow, be it in actuality or be it in real time. So it's the culture, to answer the question directly in 2 words, it is culture and behaviour. We don't do it like that round here, son. And it's that sort of mentality that prevails across the whole of the supply and delivery. And it's just not a UK problem. It's a global problem. I'm lucky enough to travel to many parts of the world, and it's not just the UK. It's wherever you go. And it's either worse or better, but it's not far off where we are. So that's my view anyway. Right or wrong?
I guess my positive view on it would be, in the water sector anyway, in the AMP6, we all know that when anybody draws the value curve, it's all the thinking that you do up front that where you make all your big savings. In the AMP6 cycle, we're at that tipping point. In the next 9 months, we have the ability to help influence the next 5 years. Because as we said, it's not about what we term off-site. It's about understanding your customer need, smart productization, and then once you've got that smart productization, less parts used more often costs you less money. You then just industrialize it. It's how you deliver it. You have the heartbeat of a factory. Now, if you can't do that mid-amp, because you're back to my Aston Martin in the shed, you've still got the old designer product, it doesn't work in the new factory. So we have the opportunity once every 5 years, and I think actually most of our customers and clients are really up for this because they've got a challenge from Ofwat that's double-digit efficiencies. You can't do what you did yesterday to get that level of efficiency. We've worn out that effort. We have to do something different. So my test is to everybody I speak to, if you go to the coffee machine today and you go to the same coffee machine tomorrow and do exactly the same as you did yesterday, you will get the same result. You need to feel a bit uncomfortable in this space to make a difference.
For me, I think framing the question is why aren't more people doing this? I think the signs are that they are. We've already seen in some of the tender documents that we've received and were responded to that there have been specific references. Our clients have been wrestling with the issue of whole life cost for a long time, and I feel that there's now a response developing around what people are calling TOTEX. I think our clients might be slightly frustrated that we're using that to come to them to deliver whole life cost, but I think we've been wrestling with this for a while. I felt at one stage that AMP6 would be all about build off-site simply in its own right, but there are so many other advantages by developing a standard range of solutions, and within Costain we start with our customer and client first. We're very customer centric. We have an expression called being curious, so we ask the question of our client. We're curious about their business. How can we make their business better? So if we can find a way of plugging the best solutions together to the benefit of our clients, then that's what we're going to do. and we are going to do that with the help of the supply chain. We cannot do it on our own. We need it with them. But as Richard would know, at Costain we initiated what's called the Water Sector Hub. That comprises of Costain, not surprisingly, Skanska, Langeroog, Namenka, Baileys, MMB, and under the auspices and stewardship of Build Offsite and the Water Industry Forum, we're throwing that open to anybody who wants to become a member. We're happy to share best practice. This initiative is too precious for one company to fumble it and get it wrong. We don't think we've got all the answers, and I don't think that we would be arrogant enough to tell our clients that we have. But we do know that we've got some of the solutions. But we're happy to work with our competitors, which may seem slightly unnatural, but it's what we have to do. We appreciate that that's what we have to do to get the best advantage for our clients, and that's what we're actively doing. So if there's anybody there who wants to know more about it, please make contact, and we'll keep you posted. The only rationale behind that, though, is that you have to be willing to share. You cannot come along and keep your own secrets and expect us to share our best practice with you. There is no commercial information discussed there. It's just best practice. You know, we tried X and the result was Y, and we want to share that because I feel that as an industry we're not very good at sharing best practice from client to client or infrastructure to non-infrastructure, and a lot of the same rules apply. So in summary, we're trying to encourage our clients to do it. Our clients are actively encouraging us to do it, and we feel the supply chain is ready to have that conversation with us, but with a limited 12-month period perhaps to get that resolved.
Off-site manufacture comes with quite a lot of baggage, doesn't it? I'm thinking of the prefabs and some of the mental associations that I think people still have when you talk about off-site manufacture. Is that one of the barriers, do you think, in the water industry, Richard?
I have no idea what that word you used was, because I will never use it, but it is, as you say, a barrier. So that's a 20th century term. We're in the 21st century, so let's move on. It's a historical blip. And they actually did quite well, actually, those things that I can't remember the name, they're called whatever they are. If you think about their design life, let's throw it open to you guys. The buildings that I can't remember the name of, what was their design life? This is open. Guess. 30? That man there gets the prize. 10 years. They've now been listed in Birmingham and London 60 years on. Think about it. So man and woman design something, they have no clue how long it's going to last, and it lasts, it's much pilloried up and down the world and around the world, and it's still standing. Why? Because we've maintained it. That doesn't mean to say it's good, bad or indifferent. So anyway, let's move on. What was the question? I'd like to bring some threads actually to what Colin was saying and Steve was saying. We're currently about 15% of the industry total. So if we spend 100 billion in the UK per annum, and we take all construction, public and private, we estimate that 15% is done using off-site techniques. That's where we think we are.
I'm interested, you talked, Steve, a lot about sharing best practice and sharing knowledge, and when we're talking about driving efficiencies, I guess one of the logical conclusions of where you're going might be that water companies develop standard assets and then share some of the costs of building those off-site. How open do you think the industry is to that kind of sharing, that level of integration?
Well, that's a trick question, isn't it, that, Ellen? That's a curveball. I was rather hoping that AMP6 would give us time to have that discussion and conversation with our clients, but I'm rather more optimistic now that they would potentially get together. There are a limited number of products or assets that they want building, so why should every one of them be either mildly or wildly different? It simply doesn't make sense. I think the only people that prosper out of that situation are the designers, potentially. and the cost consultants. And what that then does is restricts the amount that our clients have got to actually physically spend on delivering assets. So I think if we can actually break those barriers, I think it will take one or two bold clients to work together. We can either help introduce them, or they can meet each other of their own accord. I'm sure they could. But I think that would be a dream scenario for us. That would be excellent, I think. What do you think, Matt?
Just building on that, I think one of the challenges that we do have, and Steve kind of highlighted it, is around the current commercial models within the industry. I think when you're looking at reasons why this isn't being embraced more completely, and why standardisation is not being embraced, I think one of the issues is the commercial models that we have, whereby people at the front end are very much rewarded by time they spend on a job, paid by the hour kind of mindset. I think we need to change that. I was with one of the leading engineering consultants a couple of weeks ago. Actually, we were talking about standard solutions, and he recognised that they needed to move to a more standard solution approach to their business. And I was asking the question, candidly, how does that correlate with your current business model? He said, I don't know, it doesn't, but we need to find a way, because if we don't find a way, we won't get traction. I think, and his view was his business would fall by the wayside if they didn't get on board. So I think we need to look at how those business models work as well, to provide further encouragement, because there's a whole range of there's the technical capacity, there's the sort of physical capacity, the manufacturing capacity, but then there's also the culture and the structure of the business, the structure of the industry.
I think, building on that, I think the culture as well, I think we've all worked in the construction industry, and we probably all recognise the phrase design, procure, build, commission and hand over. That by default is a bunch of baton transfers, a sequential process. So I come up and design a book, I then go to Richard and Matt and Steve and ask them to price it. They come back with prices I can't afford. We then do VAVE. Then someone gets a chance to build at some point down the line. I then go and hand it over, and the customer said it hasn't even got the novel I wanted in the first place. It's that kind of thing. Well, I think one of the things, if we really want to do that, we understand the value is up front, so it goes from sequential to simultaneous. I want the person who understands about bookmaking right up front in the process, and I want to understand how much money I've got to do it, and then say, put the smart brains in to design this book simpler. And I think we do it reverse. So I think we create as an industry our own challenge. So how do we bring our product supply chain on board early to help use the brains to solve the problem that we need? So it's a question, and I think the ECI phase of the AMP6 is our opportunity to do that. The product manufacturers around this forum today have got all the R&D and product knowledge we need to solve our problems. We haven't got them as Costain. We're not the specialist manufacturers, but we're the integrator with our clients.
Let's talk a bit about AMP6. Is it really delivering a different way of water companies working with their contractors and supply chain?
I think the Ofwat are making it much more ferocious in AMP6 than they did in AMP5. That's my opinion. Johnson Cox seems to have this really in control. He's saying he's not happy with the results that are being shown thus far from the utilities companies, be they water or be they electrical. They're all being thrown out and not good enough, come back and do it properly, which is a good place to be as a taxpayer. So AMP6, let's just qualify what we're talking about. That's 25 billion, not million, pounds in 5 years. Just get your heads around that number. That's a huge number. And who's going to be paying for it? We are. It's taxpayer dollars or pounds. That's what it is. So there has to be a better way. And if Ellen will forgive me, I'd like to give you a little story. And it starts off by somebody somewhere is designing another set of toilets. My question is why? Surely we've designed all the toilets we need for life. They should be in a book. We pick up the book, there's the toilet. Any colour, any shape, whatever you want. We don't need to design them, but we do. That's part of a job. Now, is it a necessary job is the question. I'm not going to answer that. But what I am going to do is go into, you asked a real question, and I'll take you on a very short journey with a well-known utilities company that shall remain anonymous. If you ask me later, I'll tell you who it is. but it's anonymous at this moment in time. The journey started 7 years ago, not 7 months or 7 weeks, 7 years ago. And it involved fundamentally changing the mentality, the culture and behavior. And then 4 years later, we start talking about the process of changing what they were doing. And we managed to take a stock item that was designed individually, and they were making 187 of them. Each one was different. Why? Because it is. Just the same. It's doing the same job. But because there are 650 designers out there, they're looking to design. There's a clue in the title. It's not their fault. But you have to ask yourself, is it a requirement? Do we need 187 varieties? Probably not. I'm not saying how many we do need, but this particular company managed to get their costs down from 100,000, now it's 60,000 and rocketing down. Because it's a manufactured item, just like a car. It's a component. So, true story, and I think we should be doing more of that in this sector, because there's little or no architecture involved in what we're doing. It's mostly straightforward design.
Yes.
And we think it goes global. It's not just about the UK. This is about us making more for exports as well. It is in the back of my mind.
Great. For me, I think there's an emphasis within the industry in designers designing things as they do. Sometimes starting from first principles, sometimes cutting and pasting. That introduces error somewhere along the line. For me, we then go out and cost that solution and find that we haven't got enough money. So we design and then cost it. And I think the principle that Colin was talking about earlier was, if you look at the analogy with the motor sector, what they do is they pitch their product at a certain price point. They know that the Ford Focus will sell for a price of between X and Y, and they design it to cost. So a simple, again, I'm good at the simple changes with words, aren't I? Instead of designing and then costing, we're trying to introduce a concept of designing to cost. We've seen that operate very successfully in other sectors. We have a client once removed who set a budget, which is anathema to some of our clients and to some of the design community. It's not common practice by any stretch. But if you set a budget, then that's what you can afford. So there's no wastage. And if you set a budget and you repeat that product, you then can introduce continuous improvement over time. But one of the things that we'd like to see is a standard asset delivered for 12 months, the design frozen for 12 months. At the moment, our client can't resist the temptation to tinker, because that's how things are, and that's acceptable. I'm not criticising that, but it's how things are. I don't know if anybody else is familiar with that concept. A few nodding heads tells me that that's the case. But yeah, it's about designing to cost, freezing the design, and sticking with that, and then delivering and getting really, really good at it. And that then allows us to be more productive and leave our client with more asset for their overall spend, really, which I think is a laudable aim. So
I'd hate to feel that this sounds like we're knocking the designers, but actually it's far from it's the opposite, because it's kind of like most things, it's a lot harder to design something that's simple. So actually what we want is the intelligence of our design community to work out, oh, well, these are the 5 complex things that we had to bespoke last time. Can I use your brains to actually work out how we don't need to bespoke it anymore and make it simple to deliver? That is actually quite a challenge. So actually it's rewiring our thinking and community to thinking different and delivering different. It's not saying we don't value design. In fact, we value design much more.
Yeah.
We need smart design rather than what I'd say repetitive.
Yeah, I just can't reinforce that. This is not about knocking designers. This is about saying we absolutely need great engineers in this country who can do innovation, who can produce innovative solutions, but just doing it in a different way.
Just a little supplementary to add to my colleagues' thoughts here. There are some people say that perhaps the Anglophile has got a sort of an island mentality. I didn't say that, but it could be there. Now the Americans, they live on a bigger island. The Japanese, they live on a bigger island. We all live on islands to some sort of extent. And I would put the caveat that says, if we don't do the sort of things that my colleagues are saying, somebody else is going to do it for us. That's the threat. So if you think you've got time to do all these things and it's an abundance of time, I genuinely don't think you have. So we need to seize the moment before some of the foreigners do it for us. And I'm a globophile at heart, although a deep-seated Anglophile. So I'll leave you with those thoughts.
At this stage, I'm going to open up to questions and comments from the floor. Does anyone have any questions or comments on what they've heard today? Don't be shy. Yeah.
Wow, dazzled.
The dazzled, yeah.
Stunned them into silence.
Yeah, Sean. Yeah.
Someone over there.
Good afternoon, I'm Sean Stevens, EPS Group. I think Steve touched on the subject of standards, and I think that's really relevant here to everybody. And we're sat in a situation where we're being asked to deliver added value on a daily basis, but within a very constrained situation, and a lot of those constraints are based around standards. I suppose preservation of traditional standards. Water companies invested a lot of time and resources in developing those standards, and they do tend to be treasured to some extent, and rightly so in many cases, because you have to have that sort of level of quality control. I suppose I'd be interested to see what Costain's view is on accelerating the standards challenge process going into AMP6, how that can perhaps be facilitated, and what role the tier ones can perhaps take in either leading that or pushing the water companies into a more accelerated change process when it comes to standards.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think my experience of our customers certainly is that they encourage that challenge. We need to be able to demonstrate why we want to do something different. It's no good just saying let's do different for different's sake. And so we need to understand the drivers that they've got. I think there's also an element of, and we're seeing increasingly across a number of the customer organisations, more alignment through their organisations between the kind of specifiers and end users. Because we all know the challenge of historically getting people who have operated these things into the game early enough and get them to buy into what they want to do. So we are seeing from the customers better alignment, and I think that's to be applauded and to be encouraged. But I see the customers are looking for challenge actually. What we're told, you're not challenging enough. So we're trying to respond to that, I guess.
I think building on that is, I talked about simultaneous versus sequential. It's about integrated teams. We talk about collaboration. This is actually, if you can divide that £25 billion spent into, let's call it product families, and then have product family teams that have got the product companies, your client, the integrators, all working to that challenge. As Steve mentioned earlier, and it was a different industry but similar. I think London Underground had the challenge of the £1 million lift. I saw it the other week at Build Off-Site. And you put the smart people in a room to come up with the answer. And naturally that changes the behaviour about how you challenge a standard. So you're not kind of going to the gatekeeper's inside. And I think that's part of the culture and behaviour we need to think about.
Yeah, it was an interesting choice of words actually, Sean, because the term accelerate was exactly the term that was used to describe the water sector hub. Its sole rationale is to accelerate the take-up of factory thinking in the water sector, because a lot of our clients understand it. They understand it very well. They'd just like us to show them how. So I think if the altruistic view was, if we all shared our success stories, we would save a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of frustration. And as Richard has already alluded to, the clock's ticking. We don't have a lot of time to develop these solutions. So we need to get the best of what's out there, share the evidence, and keep communicating that. And I think that if we can do one thing in AMP6, it's to resolve that particular aversion to sharing best practice. So, yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'd like to ask a question of you, actually. Who thinks that what's being said currently about the water sector and the acceleration of change is a good idea, by a show of hands? Who thinks it's a good idea? Okay. Next question, why? Only kidding.
Hi, I'm Sam O'Hara from Veolia Water. I love the idea of the ASSA standards and being able to create a standard product, but how does that affect innovation? How do you promote innovation through that? And you know, how long are these standards going to be in place for? Is it just the AMPA, or are you going to continue having the same standards, and then are you stifling innovation through it?
Maybe I'll try and I'll use the car analogy again. So if you think about what Richard said about the 100-year car industry is about 100 years old, construction's what, thousands of years old. Anybody here drive a Prius? Right, I'd say that's quite revolutionary. That's all completely productized. There's a lot of innovation in that product. So actually it's the smart thinking. It's not saying don't innovate, it says innovate and then use it many times. And I think that we kind of use the reason not to do it versus the reason why to do it. And they had exactly that challenge on the Prius, which was create a vehicle that is going to be a hybrid, and here's the answer, go away and work it out and put some smart people in a room to do it. And that's exactly what we're kind of asking us to do as a collective. And they didn't have 25 billion, they had far less of a spend.
I think for me it's about, when you continuously innovate, it's just how we introduce the innovation. So it's not about innovating piece by piece by piece, but just going back to the motor industry analogy, you'd introduce a new version, the 2013 model or the 2014 model, which would incorporate a number of innovations and then productise it. So the innovation process is constant. It's the introduction which is staged to be most efficient. Because you wouldn't want to be in a situation of updating your car production line kind of every day, would you? I mean, you just couldn't imagine it, could you? Running onto the line at Dagenham or wherever they build cars, and oh, I've got a great idea. We're going to change this next one. It just wouldn't happen.
Sorry? How do you trial it?
Sorry, I can't hear.
Using BIM.
Oh, beat me to it.
Very good.
That's what it's there for.
Yes.
It's a model that the whole team can use. And if you're looking at some of the things that are available now through printing, 3D printing, you can make models of hips and joints and for human beings. All this stuff. I mean, the kids are doing it today. It's only the old folk like me that can't do it. It's beyond their ken.
I think Richard stole my thunder there. For a while now I've been thinking that ask me a question, the answer to it is BIM. So if you want to make it safer, well that's BIM. If you want to make it smarter, well that's BIM. But I suppose the question is what is BIM really? Because it means different things to different people. I think we can use smart modelling and 3D printers, which they're no longer science fiction, are they? They're out there. They're not very expensive. I haven't got one, but I'd like one. I'd like to create a model of every client's standard asset, so they put it on display in their reception. This is what they do. You walk past it, and you know that that's what they're about. That's what they build. I don't think that what we're trying to do will constrain or restrict innovation. Actually, I think what we need to do is focus on what is the real issue, what is the real problem, and then we need to go out to the supply chain and pose that problem. I think collectively we suffer slightly from fear about the overdue regulations. I think our clients, quite rightly, would not welcome a challenge to their procurement process. So we need to overcome that in some way, shape or form. But I feel that if we can there are hundreds of innovative solutions just in this hall today. Only 2 or 3 may actually be relevant for me and what I'm looking at, but for somebody else there may be another 2 or 3, and it's picking those solutions and then developing them. I think a lot of money and time is wasted within clients and contractors on innovation to solve a problem that there is perhaps not there, when the supply chain actually is carrying out research and development regularly. What we would like to do is like the suppliers in the audience to come and see us with your innovative product and explain very, very clearly about where that's going to benefit our customers and clients. And if it can benefit them, then we would need to look at a business case for introducing that. That is effectively one strand of our strategy. We want the brightest suppliers supplying us the products.
may help with an analogy. A couple of years ago, I went to McLaren, the Formula One racing McLaren, and over the head of every workstation, it says, to be a winner in a season, you have to change in excess of 75% of the motor car or the racing car. Now just think about that in construction terms. If we said that to people in construction, they die thinking about it, because if you want to change a tile on a building site, you know the procedure we have to go through. There's probably an army of people who need to be part of that process. We know it's not necessary, but it is part of the process that we need to change. So other industries are very adept at doing it because they have to do it to win. And this is about winning. And it's winning a global race. It's not about UK race, it's a global race. We need to be the best at what we do, wherever we are, in everything we do. That's a tall order, a lot to be done. And you can't do it by looking through the rear view mirror. You've got to be looking out through the front windshield to get the inspiration that you need for the future. And we're not good at that in construction, in my view.
I think that's a really interesting point about winning, and picks up on a point I wanted to make. Colin, you were talking about cars and the automotive industry, where I imagine a lot of the innovation is driven by market forces. So I'm interested in how in a monopoly sector that kind of thinking can and should be, and to what extent it is, replicated by the regulator.
I think actually it's interesting because you're right. As Steve said earlier, the Ford Focus example is a great one. You know, if you build a Ford Focus and you get the price wrong, the car company goes under. And you know, the Rover is a good example of it. We all remember that in the last 10 years. That's why they went under. They were not competitive. I actually do think there's an intrinsic competitiveness, at least in the water sector, between the clients. Because actually, if I won't mention names, but if you go to one and say, well, they're doing this over here and they're doing that over there, you can see the shoulders go up a bit more, we're going to be smarter. And I think your example, you gave one of them 7 years ahead, actually that's known in the industry. So I think we have to kind of plug into that a bit. So each of our clients we're working with, we're trying to help them be the winner, and actually you've got to create that, the old phrase of burning platform. The regulator's helping us. We're at the tipping point at the moment. There's a natural competitive in human nature across the various water companies. We need to be, shall I say, the catalyst to help that happen.
Time for a couple more questions from the floor.
Mark Owen from Costain, working on the E5 programme at Severn Trent. We held a supplier workshop last year, and one of the messages that came through loud and clear when we talked about innovation and standardisation was the difference in standards between the different water companies, and how if there's one thing we could do would be to get rid of the different widgets on every product that they all ask for. So you mentioned 480 light bulbs in Severn Trent. There's probably 1,800 across the whole UK. Do you see any opportunity in this programme? I know you were talking about competition between the clients, but do you see any opportunity to try and improve standardisation across the whole sector?
Do you want me to start and then Steve?
Yep.
I guess that's a really good point, Mark, and I think this is when I said we're going to have to all feel a bit uncomfortable not going to the same coffee machine, because we're going to have to challenge our clients. But the reason we've created this water hub that is cross supply chain network and client is to provide that forum where you can have that neutrality. So I think Matt talked about generations. Every year there's a different model. I think generation 1 in the AMP6 is probably the first 2 years of getting everyone to think like this. The back half of the AMP is the opportunity. Now we're all thinking the same. Actually, you're doing the same stuff. Can't we share? So I think there's probably a kind of the staircase of the steps we need to go through. But I think we need to put in the enablers like a neutral forum, like the Water Hub.
Yeah, and building on that, we have our product strategy, which is a pyramid, and it starts with the asset. We move to a platform, then a sub-assembly, and then components, and then parts. And as we've been discussing earlier, if you can buy fewer parts, then it's easier to maintain and it's cheaper. It's the model that Volkswagen have adopted to rule the world, really. They own Bugatti, they own Audi, they own Seat, Skoda, amongst others. So for me, it's about identifying which of the assets lend themselves to being split down into sub-assemblies, components, parts, and platforms, and being quite smart about how we put those together. There are hundreds and hundreds of possible solutions, but I think we can adopt some really simple standards that deliver our customer requirements at a cost that's affordable, and that then becomes about maintaining that product in service. There's the emphasis on whole life cost, and a client, we feel, will spend that little bit more if they're going to get 20 to 30 years of guaranteed lower operating costs. There are different methods of looking at that. We find that some clients use carbon as a proxy for cost saving. If you get involved in a discussion about cost, it tends to go so far and then people walk away. But if you change the discussion to we've got a problem with carbon and we need to reduce our embedded or operational carbon, then the suppliers have a light bulb moment, the clients get involved in the discussion, and we can actually bring engineering solutions to bear to deliver a better outcome for everybody, really. So it's about flipping the conversation sometimes, and if we can get a standard solution that has lower carbon footprint, and guess what, it happens to cost a little bit less, then why would clients not adopt it? Although water by nature is, for me, a conservative industry. I understand the rationale for that, but it is quite conservative. If it's proven and in use for 20 years somewhere else, it will be considered by some companies. And if it's in use for 30 years, they might even use it themselves. So,
Gentleman at the back.
Good afternoon, Kevin Fitzgibbon is my name. I'm with the Water Services and Systems Innovation Centre based in Cork Institute of Technology in Ireland. There's a growing emphasis on critical infrastructure internationally, probably led by the UK in fairness and the United States, in terms of analysing the degree of criticality of infrastructure and its preparedness for unforeseen events. I'm coming from a position of lack of knowledge really of the UK system. I'm also coming from a position as being a former water services designer. However, moving swiftly along. My question is this: has the discussion around resilience and preparedness from a critical infrastructure perspective started to permeate the discussions around AMP6 or not?
I guess I can give you a short answer, and that would be yes. I think we're certainly seeing amongst a number of our customers that resilience is a key issue, particularly around clean water supplies. And obviously, flooding recently has caused it's been out in the headlines. But certainly, clean water supply resilience is definitely a critical issue. And I think we're also seeing increasing demand. Perhaps is a word. Maybe it's not the word, but an interest in the ability to monitor and manage critical assets and do a risk-based approach in terms of asset management. And so harnessing data that is available to make risk-based approach, risk-based, get your teeth back in, risk-based judgments about assets.
So you seem to be saying that this is being approached on a systematic basis as opposed to an ad hoc utility by utility basis?
I would say organisation by organisation. There is not a systematic approach, in my opinion, across the UK. Each organisation is solving its own problems. Is the picture I see? Because
the ITRC, is the Infrastructure Transitional Research Centre, is probably trying to address this on a more wide countrywide basis. But I'm just curious and just interested to hear your answer. Thank you very much.
I could add a little bit to that, actually, in that on the 27th of March, the Water Industry Forum met in London. I couldn't be there. And they were attempting to do just that. They were looking at the resilience of the UK water sector. They were trying to start that discussion. So perhaps, as another interested body, I could maybe see you and point in the right direction. I feel sure it'll be on their website. I wasn't there because I was elsewhere, but that's the beauty of being asked a question, isn't it? You've asked the question, I've shared the response with you. So.
We've got time for one last question, if anyone would like to make a final question or comment before we wrap up. In that case, I'm going to ask the panellists. I think we've got a really good sense of the scale of the opportunity and of the challenge, as well as the time pressure going into AMP6. So just for our closing few minutes, I'm going to ask you to look a bit further ahead, do some future gazing and talk about where you see the industry at the end of AMP6 going into AMP7. And you can talk, you have a choice. You can talk either where you think the industry will be or what you would like to see. So I'd be interested in your views, or both perhaps. So Steve, I'll start with you.
For me, I would like to see the clients discussing and sharing best practice. I would like to see a range of standard assets adopted. I would like to see the use of BIM being widespread. I would like to see if 15% of the current market is off-site in construction in its entirety, then there's 85% to go for me. So I feel we need to set some really ambitious targets. So I would say about 50%. If we don't set an ambitious target, you can guarantee we won't get anywhere near it. So I think that's what I would like to see, really.
Well, I'm not going to repeat what Steve said, because obviously we're going to move it forward again. So I would, a slightly different dimension would be, looking back at 2020, we're sitting here and everybody cannot believe that we all did it. And that was all about the culture and behaviour. So factory thinking is about a philosophy and a way of working, not just a set of tools, because they're going to keep reinventing themselves. And actually, we're all going to not be going to the same coffee machine every day.
I guess I'll do the dangerous thing and make a prediction. I think from the interest we're seeing from customers around the country and from the industry generally, I think the factory thinking approach will be embraced. I think we'll be seeing more of that. I think also we will be seeing more of a risk-based approach to asset management. So I think there'll be more gathering of data, more analytics of data, and I think you'll find the whole operation and maintenance routine becoming smarter. I think that's inevitable as technology improves and the equipment becomes cheaper. I think, and we can take so much from other industries already doing that to improve. So I think that will be snapped up, frankly.
Thank you, Richard.
Can I ask a question first? How do we measure construction around the world? If I say to you, we got a construction project, what's your retort? You measure it in cash, but you also put a time constraint. What is that time constraint that you give the client back? You say it will take, this is the interactive bit. You say it will take either weeks or months, or in some cases, years. Now my challenge is to the people who say that, how many hours are there in that week or that year or that month? And the reason we measure it is because we don't want to define it, because we know it will be wrong. Slightly cynical, but true. So back in the day when I was a client, I started to say, we will measure it in hours. Now, it's not a surprise that every manufacturing industry known to man and woman measures things in hours and minutes, because it's measurable. Weeks are not measurable. How many days in a week? 5 days, 7 days, 6 days? How many hours in the day? Don't know, don't know, don't know. And that's part of the fudge of construction. It's a fudge. It doesn't have to be, but it could be. So I'd urge you, if we're looking at factory thinking, which is what our colleagues here are talking about, is we need to start getting the parameters, the metrics, the measurement measured in things that we can all understand, which are hours and minutes and seconds. Point one. Point two, going back to something Colin said about standard components. If you look at the big group that one of them was talking about, the VAG, Audi, Bentley, not Bentley, Bugatti, Lamborghini, Porsche, Audi group, there are 80% common components, and yet all the cars look different and they're all priced differently. That's what this industry, AMP6, is crying out for. There can be differentiation, should it be necessary, but they could be underneath, they could be all the same. The components could all be the same. So it's a grouping of standard components that the whole industry have come to own. Nobody owns it, the industry owns it. which is a great way of collegiate thinking and sharing that we've talked about a lot today. Please do not underestimate, I call it disruptive change. This is a difficult journey. If you want the easy way out, it's not going to be easy. It is hugely difficult. That's why I'm only 21. It's a very, very difficult thing to do. And if you think it's easy, you're sadly deluded. So go after it. There's a great deal to be had, and I think AM6 will show the way for other industries and around the world as well on the way we can do things more effectively in this wonderful industry called construction that needs to be helped along its way.
I think that's firmly laid down the gauntlet to the industry, so perhaps we can come back next year and see how it's gone. All that remains is for me to ask you to join me in thanking the panellists, and thank you for coming along today.